Good evening, everyone. I call to order the City of Victoria Council Workshop meeting for Monday, August 24th at 5:30. Tonight, we have one item to discuss the 2021 preliminary general fund budget. Without objection from the council, I'm going to waive the reading of how people can call in. Council, any objections?
No.
All right, with that, let's go ahead and begin. It's discuss 2021 preliminary general budget, fund budget. Trish, it's all yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, we'll be taking our third look at the 2021 budget. This discussion is to gain council direction on the preparation of the max tax levy, which will come before council on the September 14th meeting. September 9th, we'll take a look at the enterprise funds and CIP discussion, with a follow-up on the 23rd of November for direction to staff on those budgets, and also the general fund proposed final budget and CIP. And that will go to adopt on the December 14th. The agenda, tonight we're going to take a peek back at some of the previous workshop discussions. We're going to look at the proposed 2021 levy, what we have for current fund balances, and ask for council policy direction for 2021. So a quick recap, just touching on where we've been. We had talked about the comp study implementation, the new IT capital fund, the plans for funding of Greencrest, beginning the implementation of the space needs study. Was decided to use franchise fees to pay for the Wasserman Preserve Park, and also the go-ahead on the GPA agreement with the county for the crosswalks. The tax levy process, of course, the city council sets that annually. In September, then on the 14th, we will have you adopt the max tax levy, and at that point it cannot go any higher than its preliminary levy. And so city council and staff will continue throughout the fall to look for more savings for the city before that final in December adoption. Updates to the proposed levy. The preliminary budget projections since our last meeting. Staff's made a few changes to reduce the levy, went down from 7.62% to 6.95%. The tax rate's now just a slight increase over the 2020 tax rate at about 0.6% instead of 1.6% increase. The average homeowner would pay $2.83 a month increase in the city's portion of their property tax bill. So what's changed? The Carver County Prosecution Services were able to reduce the amount they're billing to the city by eliminating 2 staff, and they're now partnering with another county for some of their services. So we were happy that they were able to pass that savings on to the cities that they serve. The fire department's going to be able to purchase some of their safety equipment with CARES funding that they originally were proposing to purchase in 2021. And also the city has a plan to purchase some IT equipment to allow staff to work remotely with CARES funding, so that also reduced the 2021 budget. Staff's also recommending moving transfers of $10,000 each from gifts to the park and IT to capital facilities fund. The gifts to the park funds primarily used for concerts in the park, and with the reduced number of concerts due to COVID, it seems that that fund would not need to have a transfer for 2021. And with the information that's been received through the space needs study, it would be helpful to use those funds in the capital facilities fund instead. Yeah.
I have a question. When we get a gift for parks, isn't it designated specifically for parks?
Yeah, and those do go into that fund.
Okay,
However, this is a transfer that we've been doing from the general fund
Oh,
to the
into
gifts
it?
to the park.
Okay.
So that council can make that decision, but yes, any donations go into that fund and stay into that fund. So those are used for those concerts.
So just to clarify, you're going to defer the transfer of the $10,000. So we're going to keep it in the general fund rather than move it to the gifts in the park.
Right, so we would send it to the capital facilities fund, is what staff is proposing.
Specific
That we-
purpose being? What's the purpose of you, what are you gonna use it for?
Councilmember Bo, Mayor, members of the council, we are, as you know, we are in this process of doing a space needs assessment, and as part of that process, they'll be making some recommendations for building maintenance of all of our facilities, as well as planned capital purchases, and those will fall in 3 separate buckets: 0 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, and 10+ years. And so we know that we do have some needs in the relative near future, and we'll be bringing back that detailed information to you in the coming month or two with specific plans on how to spend that. But we do anticipate that we're going to need to increase our capital facilities fund and start increasing the fund balance over time here as we get more information from this study.
Okay, thank you.
okay, thank you.
So the projected property tax changes, this would show what the tax city tax would be on a median value home in 2021. The increase is $34 per year compared to last year's median home, which equals to the $2.83 per month increase. The city in the past has focused on maintaining a stable tax rate and has used that tax rate goal as a starting point to determine the outcome of the budget. The tax rate in 2013 was nearly 40%, and it has steadily dropped since then and has remained fairly steady for the past 5 years with an average tax rate of 32.6. So right now, we're landing right at that 5-year average with our projected rate of 32.66.
Question,
Yeah,
why do we call it the average tax rate in everything that's written instead of the average tax capacity rate?
home value?
No, the 32.6% is the tax capacity rate. It's not the tax rate. Why don't we call it that?
Why don't we call it that?
The tax capacity rate?
Do people know what that would mean?
Well, right now, they think our tax rate's 32%.
So should we always say of 1%?
Yeah, something like that.
I mean, it's 32.66% of the 1% that the city could charge
Exactly,
on
which
the
means
home value.
the actual tax rate is a fraction.
Right. Yeah,
I think that's the point they're trying, I think that's the point they're trying to make. It just makes it cleaner and easier to understand if you put 32.6% of 1%.
okay.
So people don't think we're charging them 30%.
Okay. So we've presented a proposed budget that shows what's needed to maintain the current service levels and achieve strategic plan goals. The 32.66% of 1% tax rate for 2021 is higher than 2020 tax rate, which was the 32.04%. So based on factors in the formula, including minimal increase in residential home values this this year, which was only 0.5% on the medium home value. So to achieve the 2020 tax rate, the levy would need to decrease approximately $110,000 from the proposed levy to get the flat tax rate. Decreases could be made in the amount of the transfers that we're doing to capital project funds, parks, trails, long-term street maintenance fund. That's completely a council decision to make. Updated levy projections, and again, this is not how much your property taxes will increase. This is the amount that the levy will increase from the prior year. So last year, 2020, it was a 13.1% increase over the 2019 levy. 2021 is the 6.95%. We're projected to have a slighter increase next year due to some of the debt, just the timing of the debt. And then you'll see in 2023 through 2025, some other debt is dropping off. And so in turn, then it will go lower again.
And that's if we don't spend any more money, right?
Right, this is what it's projected with what we have proposed today. Okay? Yeah, and if you didn't take on more debt than what we currently have in place. We do have in our long-term financial plan, though, the projects that we have talked about, like the downtown west, construction, those types of projects, those
that's
are
figured in here?
incorporated in here, yeah.
Okay, good.
We have like some street reconstructions planned. So anything that we've talked about that is in our strategic plan for within these years, that's been included. It's estimate, of course, without having hard costs.
Okay.
Trish, are estimated property values baked into that 9.4, or is that based on this year's property value?
We have a formula and we do increase it based on it, kind of an estimate, just same as we do for like inflation. We
Okay.
do increase with the anticipation that we'll have added construction and then also a certain percentage for the market values to increase.
With property values enter into the tax rate calculation. They don't affect the levy. The levy is the amount of spending, period.
That's right. So here we could take a closer look at what is driving that 6.95% increase. So the projected increase for the general fund, the operating expenses is $380,000. Debt service is only about $29,000. Some debt dropped off and some was added, so it's basically evened out. And then the transfers, there's an increase to that of $333,000, which includes the addition of the IT capital fund, and then the trails fund gets increased $50,000 every year, and it includes $100,000 for the parks fund as well. So the use of funds, the city's general fund, 31% of those funds are personnel related, since the majority of our operations are service related. Current expenses for things like contractual services, IT, prosecution, city attorney, sheriff services, as well as costs for equipment, fuel, vehicle maintenance, insurance is another 35%. And then transfers to other funds for our other adopted plans in the funds, such as long-term street maintenance, trails, capital equipment is about 19%, and then debt service payments are 15%. This just shows what it would take to make a change to that levy percentage. So to get a 0% change, you would need to cut approximately $400,000 to not have a 6.95% levy increase. This is looking at into our fund balances. This is the general fund balances. With 80% of the city's revenues coming from property taxes, the city only receives payments 2 times a year. So the city has to have enough fund balance to cash flow operations. City council has a fund balance policy that applies to your unassigned fund balance, which is 30% at the end of the year. So it's tempting to sometimes want to spend that down, but we need to be strategic about that. It's one of the strengths of the city's financial management condition to have that fund balance. We also have some unfunded needs and planned large capital purchases in the future. That blue arrow is showing what are non-spendable, so that's not in cash, that's prepaid, so that's basically items that they're already spent. The assigned fund balance, we're gonna take a little bit closer look at this in a couple of slides, but it has an intended use. It's just a more informal, assigned is it's more informal than like a committed, which your committed is the, like the revenue stabilization fund that council had passed a policy on to use for if the housing market slowed and the construction slowed down and we weren't able to meet our revenues. And then, of course, that unassigned was that 30% at the end of the year. Here's a summary of our fund balances. So this shows all of the money that the city holds and in what fund and the type and purpose of it. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about a specific fund. Where you see like debt service and restricted, those have legal constraints. So the city's either imposed by formal action that money can only be spent for those purposes, or it also could be restricted by state statute or grant requirements, depending on where the cash came from. Like tree replacement is assigned, so that's more of an informal use of funds, but yet was decided last year with council that we were going to use that for that emerald ash borer, and there's like a 10-year plan to fund that, so that's what that cash is sitting there for. Our enterprise funds, that's mostly restricted. They have different revenue sources, so it's not your general taxpayer money that's funding those.
Trish? I see the TIF fund here, we've got 189,000, which is restricted, and you also mentioned we have $500,000 in pooling funds. Where would those be?
So right now, there is some of that pooling is still in the debt service. So until we close that out, that money's still restricted.
So Trish, you would transfer it eventually to the TIF?
So we're gonna decertify the TIF fund, and then once all of that is closed out, then those funds would be available.
But the TIF, what's the restriction?
There is no restriction on like when you can use it. It's just that we still have to report on that TIF district until all the money is
Or
cleared
is
out.
the TIF, are the TIF funds restricted to a specific area or a specific?
It has to be for the redevelopment, because it's a redevelopment district, so there's an area, and that was the district, or the funds that council had previously talked about using for the parking, potentially where the old Public Works building is sitting, to add parking there. Our financial advisor thought that that sounded like a really good use of those funds, that it would qualify nicely for a project such as that. So that's something to consider for when we get that, to that point with that project, or if it moves forward.
Mayor? I have a couple questions for you. So when do we expect that was it $30,000 or so to move back into that TIF fund? Do you know about when we expect that to happen?
Oh, for that decertification
Yeah.
one? So, it would be after, so it depends on when we pay it. We actually have until 2021 to pay it,
Okay.
but, like September. But we're thinking it might be better to do it sooner, because then, once we pay that, then they'll distribute that to all the taxing districts, so like the school and everybody else, and then we'll get back our share of it. So the sooner we do that, then the sooner it comes back, and then the sooner that TIF district can be closed too, so.
And then my other question, this capital franchise, this is the franchise fees that we have opted to use to pay for Wasserman Preserve. But it says here that it's assigned to undergrounding. So what is the process that, I know we made a change to an ordinance or a policy that allowed us to use those for,
Yep, and that was already approved. So we reference the undergrounding because that fund balance that's in there right now would be fund balance that if you did have an undergrounding project that came up as an immediate need, that would be part of the use of, for that fund. But we do have in that financial statement for that fund, we have that planned out to include Wasserman. So there are revenues, obviously, that are coming in quarterly, so we're able to sustain a balance in that fund. But if you were to spend down that fund, that would eliminate any other projects for undergrounding that the council might want to consider. So yes, it's assigned, but it's not that you couldn't use it for something else if you wanted to. You would just need to
so,
agree to.
so is that true of all assigned funds, and restricted funds are only to be used for the purpose?
Restricted and committed. Committed has also been passed or committed with formal action by council. So assigned, yes, there's more flexibility. You still would need to make an agreement since it was agreed upon, but it's just a less informal agreement. Same with like your capital equipment funds. I mean, you certainly can use those for other things. The long-term street maintenance fund, it's just that we've assigned it to those funds because we know there's needs that we're planning for to use it for, but you can make a decision to use it for something else if you want to.
Great, thanks.
Yep.
I'll just add, Mayor, members of the council, that all of these are reflective of previous council direction and or resolutions or different things, and they match up to our long-term financial plan as things stand now. So if we make changes to this and there's other priorities, we'll have to figure out how those either shift priorities or look at how those other things get funded if we make changes, or if we do you push things out, do you increase the levy? But all of these things right now tie to either previous council action, direction, and or our long-term financial plan.
So in the spirit of that, I would suggest where it says capital franchise assigned, you would put undergrounding / Wasserman Park Reserve, because there has been a formal council decision to fund the debt from this fund. And so it is formal.
Members of the council member vote, I'll just say, take that one hit. That's my fault. We actually started this slide before the council took formal action in changing that policy. And so we just simply did not update the slide. So we will do that for the future.
So this is looking at that assigned fund balance. This is what each year council considers this level of fund balance and whether some items may be funded through available fund balance. So it's generally reserved for one-time, non-recurring expenditures. You can choose to fund these items differently, not do them or delay them. A couple of items like the CPR machine that has been spent. I know Andrew was looking at the warning siren upgrade, so that potentially also will be spent this year. So this is just, a lot of it is risk management, and we just wanted to let you know what is in there and remind you, this is what was passed at year end, so.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Trish, if I'm just going to pull us into a little bit of a deeper dive on that first thing. So the employee insurance contingency. So there's a little bit of strategic planning that goes into some of this. So as Tricia mentioned, we have $40,000 identified there as risk management. And if we have somebody, we're going to have somebody who retires in this fall. So when hiring that individual's replacement, if they were not on insurance or were taking single insurance, and now you've hired somebody that's opting into family insurance, we don't know when any of that's going to happen, and we don't know how people are going to change and how things are going to change throughout the year. But we need to plan for those types of things and have some sort of contingency. By keeping it in the fund balance, we're not increasing the levy if we don't need to do that, because you're keeping it in the fund balance to do that. So if we wanted to use this fund balance a little bit differently and say we could budget for those types of changes and that kind of risk management in the levy and in our wages, and you would just see that increase. Or decrease. And so right now, our strategy has been to just use the fund balance to cover it, so we're only tapping into that when those changes are needed that we cannot cover through savings in our current operations or our current levy.
But if our insurance costs go down, we don't put it in, we don't put the savings in here. We pocket it.
Reduce the levy, yep.
It's a one-sided deal.
Yep, so. Thanks.
And now I'm gonna pass it on to Dana. She's gonna take over on some of I'll click for you when you need me to.
Thank you. So we wanted to deviate just slightly, but it's related, and spend a little bit time talking about the CARES Act funding. So as you know, the city is a recipient of about $747,000. Some of that has been spent. So our balance right now, from what we've already submitted for reimbursement, we're sitting at just over $718,000. The last couple of meetings and workshops, we've talked about what we're thinking about in terms of additional expenditures. And so we just want to take you through where we have already made some commitments, and you'll have some council action this evening on your agenda to approve some of those expenditures that are beyond the $20,000. So we'll be bringing those back per our policy for individual action where necessary. And then for some of the big projects, before we start getting down too far, we wanted to make sure, too far down the road, we wanted to make sure that you were all on board with the direction. And there shouldn't be any surprises. We've talked about this, but again, before we start signing contracts and get too far down the path, we want to make sure that you're comfortable with that approach. So on that note, we'll go to the next slide, and just a little recap of the types of expenditures that we are preparing for some of these things you'll see on your council meeting agenda tonight, and some of the things we'll be bringing to you in the future. But the turnout gear for the fire department at $46,000, to look at some of the protective barriers and the facility changes for social distancing to protect the public, to protect our staff, $40,500 with Wold Architects. They are the people who are also doing our space needs assessment. Laserfiche infrastructure and workflow projects. So what this is, Laserfiche, we've been historically using as an electronic filing or archival system. It has workflow capabilities, so we can automate business processes, we can create online forms, and so we can interact with our residents, people who are doing applications, who need to access information. It allows them, instead of coming into City Hall, it will allow them to do those transactions remotely, and for staff to be remote or here and be able to see that information and process it in an automated way without printing out papers and routing things physically, which is what happens in a lot of cases right now. So computer replacements, as Trish mentioned earlier this evening, we're looking at accelerating those replacements and changing out, which we had slowly been doing, the big clunky workstations for docking stations and laptops. And so we'll be accelerating that, thereby reducing the levy for 2021. We're also looking at making AV improvements. So as we get into some of the City Hall things, you'll be seeing, we're actually going to be proposing that we shift the dais into a new location that will allow us to extend it. And as you know, we need to have social distancing, so we can accommodate social distancing and larger committee groups. Our Parks Committee has 12 people on it. You wouldn't be able to fit 12 people on there right now. Our Planning Commission is 9 with the alternates. So by extending that dais and rotating it, we can fit everybody and the audience. It's better use of space. And so with that, we'll have to make some minor adjustments with technology. This would also allow us to incorporate virtual or hybrid meetings, which we've experienced has been, we've made it work, but it's a little clunky. And so this would like fit and flow right into the AV system. So we can still have mics on for people who are here, and people at home can hear us. And so it will allow us to do a lot of those things more efficiently. And then document scanning. So as people are working remotely and accessing information on their properties or wanting applications, scanning those documents is something that we've been working towards. Every year you've been funding anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000 to scan whatever we can scan, and so we'll make a good dent. Our goal is we think we're going to be able to get everything that we have here, and so we truly will be paperless with this funding. So that total brings us to about $251,000. And then some of the feedback that some of those bigger things we talked about at our last meeting was HVAC system improvements. So we've got excellent news, and we had an HVAC engineer as well as Train come out and talk to us about various different options. And it's looking like we can fix our issues and address COVID-related air circulation with exchanges for about $118,000. And then if we wanted to, there's been some other things that we're looking at. Right now we've got this marked as UV light. You can add UV light into the airstream, into the duct. It will treat those airborne particles that come in contact with that through UV light. There's also bipolar ionization, but that has some ozone byproduct, so we're trying to stay away from that. It's newer technology, and there's also some, I'm going to say this wrong, but it's probably like catalytic converter type of technology out there that's a little bit more pricey, but a lot of the cities that we've talked to are really are planning to implement or going down the road of implementing the UV light, and this cost of $12,000 would be for all of our staffed facilities. So the recreation center, the public works, And City Hall and the water treatment plant and the fire department already have something similar, so we wouldn't need to do that. Bluebeam software, a smaller purchase, but again, this allows, this software package actually allows us to do online plan review. So you wouldn't need to bring your big plans with you. If you have them electronically, and a lot of people do have them electronically, they could submit them electronically. And we would be able to do all the approvals and routing electronically. So staff could be working remotely and people wouldn't have to come to City Hall. They could just submit everything electronically. Budget software is something that we've been looking at. In the past, we've spent about $10,000 to $15,000 to prepare our budget books. And that's not including our staff time that goes into this. And so it's a very manually intensive process. And as you know, we go through a lot of budget iterations. And so every time we make changes, we're essentially starting from scratch and rebuilding that because how everything is linked forward. So it's a very antiquated process. And we think we've been looking at budget software and so this would automate that process and have everybody be not entering data directly into our system, but rather another system so they don't mess up the finance system. So, and it's online, so they would be able to do that remotely and do the approvals and the routing and all the internal stuff before we bring things to you remotely. Our audit fees could be, we would be kicked over into a single audit at $750,000, and we do have some other federal funds that came by way of grants in our fire department and potentially through elections for reimbursement there. So we feel like we might be pushed to that $750,000 threshold for a single audit, but the CARES Act criteria says that those funds could be used to reimburse those fees. So that's something we want to look at. And then also the council chamber's space modification, what I just noted earlier, and also some furniture changes in the lobby, in the workspaces to create the social distancing and protective barriers. If you've been to City Hall lately, you may have noticed some makeshift creative tag board with little cutouts for windows, and it just doesn't really present very well. But there are some things that we can do that by making these changes now actually also allow us to achieve everything that we need to do for the next 10 years in terms of space here at City Hall. So it does click the needle forward on achieving our space, our long-term, our midterm space goals for this building as well. And that total is about $476,000. Now, this last slide that I just went through are estimated costs, so these may change. The numbers won't go higher than this in total. They just can't because this pretty much spends all of our money.
Dana, are there any ongoing costs, licensing fees with some of the software or any of those kinds of things we need to be thinking about?
Mayor, members of the council, yes, there are some minor costs. They fluctuate from a couple $100s to a couple $1,000, depending on what it is. And so I think it's like the Bluebeam software, I want to say it's like $700 a year in maintenance fees. So,
Dana, how are these funds allocated? Do we get approval before we spend the money, or do we try to get approval after?
Councilmember Gregory, Mayor, members of the council, yes, we have received a disbursement in its full amount, and so every month we report back to the state on, it's a very rigid process on what we've spent, and we have to say how it meets the criteria. We have to provide a narrative, and then everything that we've been doing, we've been running by our auditors. as well as our city attorney, as well as the League of Minnesota Cities, as well as Metro Cities. So the people who've been very plugged in on what are appropriate uses. The guidelines are still continuing to change. The criteria, even for reporting, changed again today. So we have to resubmit our reports with new information, more information. But ultimately, it will be the auditors that will be making the determination. All the things that we've proposed here are very much in line with what other cities are doing. And we have taken the approach where there are certain things that we want to make sure that some other cities are doing that we feel less confident that there may be some question on how that directly is impacted by COVID. And we're making sure that we feel comfortable that it meets the criteria and we can provide the narrative. And we are providing quite a lengthy narrative on what was the process before and how does this meet that criteria and what will this allow us to achieve. So with the feedback that we've gotten so far from our auditors, our city attorney, and other cities and how they're using similar approaches, we're getting very positive feedback from people. But we don't know for sure until.
And the final arbiter is the state or the federal government?
The federal government, although, because it's federal funds, although they're kind of pushing that back to the state, and the state has pushed that back onto the auditors.
Okay, gotcha.
But it's federal money.
Correct, it is
Okay.
federal money.
Okay.
So, there's a couple of other things. So we looked at, and we have discussed, looking at a decontamination area also at our last meeting for the fire department. That cost estimate came in at $600,000. And when we reviewed what needed to be done, we wanted to spend a little bit more time looking at, we did not feel that the changes proposed would fit in the space that we currently have. So we wanted to take a deeper dive in that. And so we'll be bringing this back as part of the space needs assessment. And we will be talking about this in more detail in September. The other piece was the public, still on this slide, sorry. We were looking at social distancing and making modifications to the common areas in the public works for their break room and shared office. Right now, it's a very tight space. There's 10 of them with social distancing. Right now, there can't be more than 4. So right now, they're just staggering their breaks and their use of that room. To make those changes there, $400,000. What we wanted to take a closer look at and what we'll be bringing back to you in September as part of the space needs assessment is the timing of when our expansion needs to happen. The changes here at $400,000 would require us to build a small addition on the north end of the Public Works building. And so we didn't feel that with a future expansion, that feeling like it's gonna fall somewhere in the 0 to 10 range for Public Works equipment, that the $400,000 addition now would be a wise use of that money, to spending that money. So we want to take a closer look at the timing on when that equipment needs to when that equipment will push us, for the need for equipment storage at Public Works will push us over the edge of needing to come up with that solution. When you built the Public Works building, we built half of the building. So the building was designed that the wall on it would be east side would come off, and you would basically do a mirror of what you have on the other side. And that would be adequate for the life of the building in the next 20 to 30 years. And so what we need to take a closer look at is what those equipment needs are and what that timing would look like. We just don't want to be spending money and then it doesn't get us anywhere. It's a temporary solution. So that's what we want to be sure that we're not doing. We want to be spending those funds wisely. On the next slide, you're gonna see this a little bit more in detail in September, but in the purple on the left, I apologize, it is quite small. We just wanted to show council, and the public that in order to achieve a longer, and we know we're not showing the whole thing here, it's still showing, is it 7 seats here, so, but the idea is just to shift, everything around. You're also seeing the conference room expanded, so we have a soffit that comes out here. This would expand that wall, where our city engineer is sitting, basically out to the soffit. We would put a glass panel there, a window, which would serve as kind of an overflow area for the public to sit or people to wait when they're coming to talk and to address council. Would also serve as a larger conference room. Right now, we can only, in the best of circumstances, we can fit 12 people comfortably around that seating area. This would allow us to sit 20 plus people, depending on the furniture solution, in this conference room.
So the door would disappear, that door would disappear.
The doorway would actually be a hallway into, so you would not cut in, you wouldn't have to walk through the conference room to get to the city hall offices. So it would function as a hallway, and you would expand this doorway here. You would expand in, push the conference room into that, so it's a better use of that space.
The door would be eliminated.
The door would be eliminated. So
what are these couches and, is that the waiting area?
I can't see where you're.
That's the city hall. That's back in the office.
Oh, that's the offices?
Are you talking about the little blobs in the middle of the, okay, so the other changes, yeah, those are actually collaborative workspaces. So they're large standing tables that allow for some impromptu meetings or to roll out if we do. We're still going to get paper plans, at least in the near future. It allows us to roll those out. The one thing, and this will make more sense on why that's needed too, if you look plan south in the blue, the small conference room, right now you actually have to come into the secured office space to go into that conference room. This actually, you'll see here under this proposal, we would put a door there. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to get people away from the counter so you don't have the congestion at the counter. And so the proposal here is to, as people come in, if they need to spend some time with staff talking about something, that you would use that conference room space to bring the public into it, to do your meeting. You're getting them away from the counter so other transactions can occur. It's a better use of that space, but ultimately we're losing a conference room space because we're not going to want to schedule that if the intention is to be to use for the public. Primarily for the counter. So those work collaborative areas become meeting room spaces. And so you'll see a little bit of a modified plan. On Friday, a subcommittee of staff went and looked at different furniture solutions with some vendors. And we are still looking at, in the orange, so on the plan, we'll call it plan right, so plan east, in the city hall workspace, so where the workstations are. When we come back to you in September, you're going to see all those cube spaces in the orange shifted more towards the north, and the collaborative tables more in the center area. And so the reason being, the people that are in the offices, if people are needing the collaborative work area to meet, can close their doors, and then they're not disturbing the people who are still in the work cubicles. The other thing that you're going to notice, there's an arrow to right in the middle is our front reception counter. So we're looking at doing some protective barriers with that as well. So the total cost of that project is coming in at $150,000. We think we're going to come in a little bit less. We're really trying to focus on furniture solutions. Number one, it's cost effective and flexible. And number two, we do have to have these CARES funds spent and the projects completed by November 15th. So large construction projects are going to be challenging because we're still required, if they're hitting over the 174,000 mark, to follow public bidding law, which will be challenging. And under more than 25,000, we're still getting those competitive quotes on services. And so we want to make sure that, again, we're spending appropriately, wisely, following all the requirements, not only of the CARES Act funds, but also whatever state statute requires from us. And so, so the focus, that's what we are looking at. You're also seeing here a break room modification, but staff have since looked at furniture. Right now, we can only fit one person in our break room. And so we have 13 people that work out of City Hall. So we're going to look at furniture solutions and different space that will give people opportunity to step away from their desks, to eat not at their desks, but still be in a space that maybe necessarily is not a expanded break room. With the plumbing changes and the wall changes, it's something that we didn't feel that we could do quick enough, and we felt, after looking at the different furniture solutions, that we could accomplish things more cost effectively by looking at furniture rather than doing space modifications. And that could possibly carry us into at least the midterm for the next 5 to 10 years as the city grows with staff.
So did I hear you correctly? Is this all supposed to be done by sometime in November?
November 15th.
Wow.
So, so Councilmember
You better get started.
Yeah, and so this is why, and Mayor, members of the council, this is why we want to, there's lead times on all these things, so we're trying to get a sense, and we realize we've not come to you with a design detail yet. We intend to do that, but we're trying to get a sense of, can we get the ball rolling on some of these things that have lead times, and bring back formal action and keep you updated and with information. And so that's why we wanted to get a sense of how comfortable you are with some of these approaches. So September 14th is when Wold will be back in front of you, going through the very design detail of the changes on this, and talking through some of the other fire and the other public works areas as well.
I see special meetings coming up.
Yeah, when you tear apart the council chambers, it's going to shut down the council chambers for a month.
Yep.
Or so
Well, Mayor, members of the council, we do have an election too, and so we would have to be very, we're working through, and we've not selected somebody to do the work, but timing, we've got a very short window, and so we'd be looking at, while council chambers, either changing meetings or meeting in a different location as an alternative. That's very much a possibility. But we also need to be out of here because this chamber is this polling location. And so we need to work around that schedule as well. So
Just from personal experience, it's hard to find contractors on short notice. Do we have feelers out there for people that can do this work?
Gregory, Mayor, members of the council, yes, we've put feelers out there. There are a lot of people in the construction area that are looking for work, and these types of projects kind of are nice. They go fairly quickly. They're not too large, and it helps them fill the time between larger projects. Some of the challenges right now are mostly on the supply chain side, which is why when they're waiting, waiting or have things that are been delayed because of materials, something like this is a good project for them. So our senses from the half dozen or so contractors that we've reached out to, we're all hearing the same thing. So we feel like these projects could move quickly. Something like an expansion on the Public Works building or doing some major renovation in the fire department was something we didn't feel in this timeline that we could manage.
Or you're still gonna have to go like crazy and really push the envelope.
Councilmember Vogt, Mayor, members of the council, just to give you a flavor of what our schedule looks like this week, we have 4 meetings scheduled with our architects this week to go through the details on this. And we had 2 meetings last week. So we're really trying to stay on top of it as best as possible and make sure that we're coming to you for direction and provide you information and make sure that you're comfortable with the path that we're headed down.
Have you scouted out where we could have council meetings?
We have.
And have some technology there?
Yes, and Councilmember Vogt, Mayor, members of the council, we have all also reached out to other communities that have mobile production trucks and units that we could still have recorded meetings. The Lions Pavilion is a possible place for us to hold a meeting. The community room, we've done that in the past. We could do something at the recreation center. So we do have some options. The technology, if we want to live stream it and record it, is going to be a little bit tricky. But like I said, we've reached out to some cities that have mobile production trucks, and we may not be able to do a live broadcast, but we feel like we would be able to at least record it and push it out to anybody who's not able to attend after the meeting.
Dana, where are we at for the overall presentation? We're running out of time here.
Really close to being done, actually. So we will, like I said, we will be running back, bringing back to you in September the fire station. As you can see here, the office on the plan west or the left here is where the fire office and training room and kitchen currently are, and that would be proposed for decontamination. We have a little concern that that area is not going to be large enough for that purpose, and so we want to spend a little bit more time looking at that, and we'll bring back information to you at that time. And then here's that addition on Public Works on that north side of the building, and this is what we want to make sure that we're not spending money needlessly. So we really want to take a good look at our equipment needs and what that long-term plan is going to look like, so we can back into the timing of when the expansion needs to be and come up with a different plan, which may very well include continuing the staggering of schedules of our Public Works employees to maintain their safety. So now we're just going to get into the discussion, which is what's left. And so I'll start with the CARES Act funds, and then I'll pass it back to Trish to walk you through the rest. But is council comfortable with the direction and the focus that we're going for the remaining expenditures for those CARES Act funds?
Thank you, Dana. Council?
Yes, we're,
I'm good.
Yes.
Yes.
It's unanimous. We're good.
Okay. Mayor, if I may, there's probably about 10 minutes or so. We could probably get through these last few pages if
Yeah, fine.
we go over.
Any objection from the council?
From
Nope. Go ahead.
Thank you. So we're going to look at a few proposed changes to current services. Council consensus was to have staff bring back additional information on the sheriff's contract. Dana spoke with the sheriff and his command staff, and they reviewed and analyzed the workload and found that the current allocation of deputy FTEs is appropriate for the level of service the city has elected to provide. That 24/7 coverage was added in 2017. In order to The current emergency call response times, 90% of emergency calls for service were responded to in under 5 minutes by Victoria deputies, and 10% emergency calls for service were responded to in under 7 minutes by general patrol deputies. To increase staffing with a full-time sergeant would be $121,472, or a 2.06% increase to the levy if you chose to do that. Staff are recommending that council adopt metrics for benchmarking how we're meeting expected service levels and evaluate staffing changes for 2022 based on these metrics. So at this time, we're not recommending increasing the staffing for the deputies. Is council have anything they want to respond to on what their thoughts are on increasing?
Council?
Nope, looks good to me.
No comments?
Okay, so you're saying you're not recommending an increase at this time?
We're just asking that council we can talk about it for 2022 to kind of come up with some kind of benchmarking metrics on what your expectations are for levels of service, and if you feel the need is there to increase services.
Okay.
Deb?
Good.
Yep, same here. It's unanimous. Nobody's looking for additional staff.
Okay, so the next item is the Salter Park feasibility study. Council consensus was to explore whether Salter Park could be utilized for public parking. The cost would be $10,000 for that feasibility study. The purpose of the study is to determine preferred parking lot layout and evaluate construction costs. It does align with council's strategic goal to improve downtown parking, and this location could provide additional parking for users of the Lake Minnetonka LRT Regional Trail and to access the downtown area. So what are this council's thoughts on doing that feasibility study?
Thank you. Council?
Personally,
Go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to see us get Public Works parking lot online first and see how that handles the load, and look at this maybe in 2022.
The 10,000 cost looks high. We're talking about a hill next to town near the trail. Why does it cost $10,000 to figure something out?
Kara can answer to that.
Tara? The question was, why is it $10,000 to determine the feasibility for Salter Park?
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Included in the scope of work is doing a preliminary grading plan because there's so much topography on the site. So they would be using existing contour data, so not completing detailed survey work or anything, but coming up with a preliminary grading plan to determine how many parking spots could be fit, and then if we would have to export material off-site in order to make the grades work, as well as looking at the prospect of the trail connection, and then coming up with a preliminary cost estimate.
That's all for the 10,000?
Correct.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. I tend to agree with Council Member Gregory that this looks like a postpone until we see how the other one works.
Yes, I'm in agreement on that one.
I perfectly said.
All right, let's move on. Next.
Okay, the next item is WeCab. Typically, the city has budgeted $2,500 for their services. They're asking, due to COVID, that they would need another $2,500, or they're asking for another $2,500 to make that $5,000 for 2021. To help support their increase in demand for service. There was attached to the packet kind of a note on that, an email to Dana, specifically to let council know, the the people that they're servicing and the need for that.
For the public that don't know WeCab, can you give a quick overview of what that is so people know?
Mayor, members of the council, thank you. WeCab is a driving service. It's a nonprofit organization, and it provides rides for no cost to residents or rides that originate or end here in Victoria. And they also are, they don't pay any of their employees, or they're all volunteers. So the drivers are using their own personal vehicles, and they are a lot of actually retired people and other people in the community who just want to provide this service as being kind of a friendly neighbor. So it's really been a good service. We have seen a slight decrease in ridership in Southwest Prime in the on-demand service, but we have seen an increase in the WeCab service. Even though they were closed down for a little bit this year, they now have resumed service, and they have seen an increase of demand, primarily for people going to medical appointments.
Thank you, council.
It's not clear to me if this is a one-time request or if it is something that they want to be ongoing.
Thank you, Councilmember McMillan, Mayor, members of the council. This was a one-time request. So our $2,500 historically has been our annual contribution to WeCab, and they would be asking for an additional $2,500 in 2021 as a one-time deal.
Okay. I think this is a valuable service. I'd be in favor of doing this.
Judy?
Yes, I agree.
Tom G?
Southwest Prime costs us $10 a ride. This seems like a reasonable ask, considering they'd had 443 rides,
Yes.
starting and stopping in Victoria. So
I think it's reasonable.
It's unanimous. Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, next is the discussion on Greencrest sidewalk that council had asked for staff recommendations on funding. And staff is recommending using Trail Gap Fund to pay for that sidewalk in 2021. If we need to review the timing of future trails, that could be done to allow for this project to move forward in 2021, we can do that. Otherwise, council could include that cost in the max tax levy, which would be a 1.87% increase. So,
Council?
This is $110,000. I know we have talked before that we could probably find this in one of our existing funds. I would urge us to find this money. I think it's an important project. I would urge us to find the money to complete it, but I would do it within either fund balance. I think revenue stabilization fund would also be a good option for us. If there's enough money in the franchise fees, I think it's another good option. So I guess I'm in favor of this project. I want to get it done, but I don't want to increase the levy to do it. I think we have some cash on hand that we could use.
Thank you, Judy.
Yes, I agree. Because I watched the Park and Rec meeting, and they're going to be asking for help with this Bavaria Trail, so I want to keep that separate, and I think it should come from a different source.
Tom G?
I agree. I want to do it. I want to spend the money, but I don't want to raise the levy. So whether we get it out of the trail fund, I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but I do want to build that sidewalk one way or another, but we need to keep that levy down.
I think we should do this. We don't have to raise the levy. We shouldn't even consider that. We shouldn't consider taking it out of the trail fund because Bavaria Trail is kind of questionable right now. Could this be funded with TIF?
Councilmember Vogt, Mayor, members of the council. I think it would be a stretch to fund it with TIF funds. But I would like to add that on the slide in the purple, I'm colorblind, I think it's purple, staff's making a recommendation, would like to make the recommendation that we use trail fund balance. So we we heard direction from council previously, and of course, we always want to give you an option to increase or decrease the levy, so that's why you're seeing what that equivalent increase would be if this were to come through the levy. However, we did find fund balance in the trail fund to be able to do this. Now, that was questionable early because Bavaria Trail was coming in a little bit over $1 million. Well, our Parks and Recreation Director, Ann Monkey, did reach out to the DNR, which is who we got a grant from, and they did say that they would allow us to extend into June of 2022 to spend those funds, which actually freed us up enough flexibility that we could fund both Bavaria Trail and Greencrest Sidewalk without a levy impact and within the trail fund. And because it's a sidewalk trail, it makes most sense to us anyways, from a staff perspective, to fund that through the trail fund. And we could do that without increasing the levy. It would draw down our fund balance in that trail fund, but we would rebound in time to do the next priorities when those come due.
So council, is there agreement that we use the trail fund?
I would use that. Dana, was there also some possibility of getting some borrowing power from the county as well on this, or?
Councilmember Gregory, Mayor, members of the council, yes, there is a policy that has been drafted and routed to city managers within the county to review and give feedback. The county is considering, the county board has not added this to its agenda yet, but the county board may be considering establishing a revolving loan fund of up to $5 million that would allow for cities to tap into for funding gaps. So this is a very good example. These gaps would be specific to road construction projects as well as trails. And there's not a lot of detail to the policy, so it does raise some questions. Timing and equity are the top two that come to mind for us. Right now, the policies, like if another city had a large gap, they could use all of that money, and the rest of the cities would have to wait. As a revolving loan fund works, as it gets paid back, that money becomes available for others to use again. So there's not a lot of detail or meat to the policy, and it hasn't really been drafted or routed to the county board for approval yet, but it is in the works and something that the county administrator will be making a recommendation to proceed. It could benefit us very, very much. It could benefit us in a situation like this, but it also may create some issues with equity down the road and ability to use it when we need to use it because the fund is already tapped.
Why would we borrow, though, if you said that we're going to have the money in 2 years anyways?
Mayor, members of the council, it's really designed for gap. So your loan could be for 6 months. It could be you just need to fund it so you have the ability. It could be over a 5-year period of time. So whatever you need until you can pay that back is how that works. So
I have a question. The Bavaria Trail connection is what, less than a half a mile? Does that make sense to spread that over 2 years?
So, Councilmember Vogt, Mayor, members of the council, the funding portion would be spread over 2 years. So what we were looking at was a fall start. And then you could potentially finish it in the spring and have your final payments in the spring. So that would be one way for us to handle it. So over 2 seasons, basically.
You would overlap 2 fiscal budgets, but it wouldn't take 2 years to complete.
Do we have to decide which fund we're going to use tonight, or are we only deciding we don't want this added to the levy?
So, Councilmember McMillan, Mayor, members of the council, yes, the direction would be, do you want to increase the levy or not? What I'm hearing is consensus that there's no desire to increase the levy. I think we have options. You're right, we could use franchise fees and modify the policy. We have other options We will be bringing this Bavaria Trail back to a workshop discussion. September 28th, I think, is what we have tentatively scheduled it for. So we could certainly go into more of the details and bring back any additional information at that time.
All right, so you have what you need from the council in the sense that everybody's opposed to raising the levy to pay for this. What fund we can take it from or how we're going to pay for it is a future discussion. Okay, good. Is there anything else on this then?
Nope.
Nothing?
So now the last slide is just asking council for direction on the proposed levy. If there's an increase or reduction what are your thoughts before we present on the 14th?
And again, this is, we can always reduce, we can never increase, correct?
Correct. So we'll still try to refine to find cuts, but we just want to make sure that you have everything in there that you want so that we're good when we go to the preliminary levy on the 14th.
All right, council?
0.6 increase on the tax rate capacity seems reasonable. I'm good with that.
Tom V?
I'm thinking
All right.
maybe we should put the sidewalk into the levy because we haven't decided where to get the money. So it would be, we can always reduce the levy before the end of the year.
Judy?
Also included as the max.
Included as the max and start really getting serious about where it's going to come from.
Down to it. Okay, yeah, I agree.
That's reasonable to me, too.
I get nervous about that because once it's up there, it's hard to bring it down. But
Right, I would, we've already got the cash. There's plenty of places where we can get the cash. I don't want to increase the levy, so I disagree, but it sounds like there's three that, do you want to
I
increase it?
do not want to do that route.
So, correct, council, three want to increase it and add it in? Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yes,
Yes.
We can,
Okay, then,
This is the final one.
no, we can still lower it, but, all right, so, Trish, you got what you need then?
Thank you.
Yep. Anything else?
That's it.
All right, for the public, real quick, we went over a little bit. I'm going to ask for, in a moment, for the council to adjourn the workshop. Once we do that, it'll take 5 minutes or so. It'll only take a couple of minutes before they can get everything reset, and we'll start the council meeting. So with that, council, can I get a motion to adjourn the workshop, please?
I make a motion that we adjourn the workshop.
Thank you. Second, please.
second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.